Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Before They Are Hanged, the second book in the First Law series by Joe Abercrombie. So, this video is going to have a quick non-spoilery section for anyone who just kind of want general thoughts on it, even though this is the second book in the trilogy, so it's kind of inherently needs spoilers, but I'll kind of do my best to give a little non-spoilery. Then we're going to jump into the spoiler section where I can talk about what I really liked about it and some stuff I didn't really care for in more detail. So as always, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and let's begin. So, Before They Are Hanged. This is the sequel to The Blade itself, and if you checked out my review of The Blade itself, I kind of talked about how this story didn't have a lot of world building, and it kind of was just purely about the characters, which it remains so. But this one has a bit more world building, so I really did appreciate that. So that's one of the first things I immediately want to say up front. We learned a bit more about the world, mostly because of the structure of the story. We have our general characters broken up into three separate groups, and they all essentially go on a different journey, kind of a there and back again sort of journey. And as a result, we kind of learn a lot more about the world and about the structure and all this kind of stuff, and a lot of stories about the past and history. We kind of get lore information. So a lot of that stuff is a lot of fun, but there are still a lot of questions I have and still a lot of mysteries that go on in the story. So apart from that, our characters, of course, continue on, and we get a lot more direct character development that goes on in this story. That is clearly a major focus by Joe Abercrombie. He really wanted to tell a story that you can really point to the points at which a character grows, like, okay, this event had this effect, so this is where this person grows and how and stuff like that. It's clear that that was kind of the focus because most stories have like your primary characters will get development or get some sort of development or have some sort of character arc. In this one, it seems like he's doing that for every single character. Characters you wouldn't expect to go on this full character arc, go on this full arc. And it's really fun to watch and it's really interesting and to make these characters feel so real. So the world kind of feels like proper, but it's weird because like normally thorough world building makes me feel the world and the characters live in this real world. But in this, it's almost the opposite. I don't know a great deal about the world, but I know so much about these characters that I feel like they are truly fleshed out real people. So it's really interesting the dynamic that I don't typically run into because I tend to read books that are very, world building on their sleeves and very much about expansive lore and stuff like that. Even though this series does have expansive lore to my knowledge, I just, of course, haven't gotten to that point yet. So yeah, but I do definitely recommend continuing on the series if you thought the first one didn't have enough world building and was just all pure character stuff. I definitely say it continues to get better. The characters have gotten better and the world building is slightly more expansive. So if you're on the fence about continuing with the series, I definitely recommend you continue going on because I am glad I did and I'm definitely going to keep going and probably go through the other trilogy as well at some point. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump over to the spoiler section where I can talk in more detail. So spoilers for Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. So this story is a lot of fun. It is so interesting because Joe Abercrombie clearly was using some tropes here. He was using the classic kind of fantasy story trope where they go on a journey. So there's Glockter who is in the Goskers. That other place he's been made superior of the Gloskers. He's been made superior of the Goskers, which is this other location, which is kind of a peninsula off the country, I think, if I have my orientation correct. It is essentially not directly connected, but it's still, holdings by their whole government, but it's basically one that they're okay with losing, essentially. So they basically send him over there, and we find out later that it was just a part of the superior of the place where he's from, the other location that I can't think of right now. It was basically a political ploy. Basically, they knew they were going to lose it, and he just wanted to see how long it could hold out for. So he sent him over there to go weed out the traitors and stuff and go deal with that just kind of as a feint almost. So we're over there dealing with Glockter and stuff, and he's like learning compassion in these weird, interesting ways. Like he's just kind of put up against the nature of his job and the nature of what he's been doing for so long. And he just he keeps getting these opportunities to be introspective about it, but he's like, he makes note that like his soul is withered, like his conscience is just like this withered husk thing and whatever. Like he basically has no compassion, almost to the point where he tries to actively have compassion. And he ends up doing this thing that I wouldn't have expected. He takes this very legitimately guilty party, this lady who is one of the high politicians of that area, who is definitely a traitor, and he basically just lets her go. He just frees her and stuff, and basically says, "Don't ever come back to this area, like, cause you'll be dead. Cause I'm telling everybody that you're dead and stuff." And he just kind of frees her out of compassion, mostly because he assumed he's going to die and everybody's going to die, and it's just not going to work out. So I just think it's really interesting that his whole character arc is kind of about this person who's been made into this almost monster, but who is slowly kind of learning that even though this monstrous things were done to him and he's been made into this person, that doesn't have to be all of who he is. That's not the end all be all. So he's kind of slowly kind of developing into this better person, like, or as good as a person like him can be, because all of these characters are so thoroughly in the gray area. It's like so interesting, more or less. So that's one group, one journey there and back. His is kind of the simplest one. Another one is with the Dogman and Three Trees, and basically the other Northerners that Logan Nine Fingers was separated from in the last book. So they go to General West, and West is basically under, he's kind of under Prince Ladislar's, like he's under his command. He's basically commander of that army, but final word comes from the prince. And so they basically kind of meet up with them, and they're like, wow, these are actually pretty lame, like fighters and stuff. Like they're actually pretty weak. None of them, are as awesome as us Northerners are, basically. So they kind of join with them because they need some help going up against Bethod, because they don't really have anybody else that'll go up against them. So they're, cutting their losses, and they're going to work with these Southerners and stuff and trying to do that. So they end up in this situation with this guy, this prince, who is just this, they call him a sop all the time, and he sounds like it. He's like one of those cliche, like, I picture him like the guy, I'll put up a picture if I can find it, but the guy who played Wormtail in the Harry Potter movies played him, and I think Sweeney Todd, and he just has this powdered wig, and he's just like made up and stuff like that. He's just like a cliche of a character that's just so funny. He seems like the worst person on the planet that will ever need to like lead an army, like one of the worst people ever. And it is immediately proven that he was the worst option ever. He completely ignores General West, and when Bethod like surprise force shows up, and they have like the high ground and everything, which if anybody has seen Star Wars, you know, when they have the high ground, you're basically lost. So it's just kind of amazing that he just is like, all the best moves in warfare is about boldness and all this kind of stuff. Basically somebody who's read all the accounts and all this stuff, or had them read to them or heard about them and stuff. So he thinks he knows what he's talking about. He has no idea about war tactics or anything. So he sends all these people off to go fight this guy, and then like this fog like kind of comes in and kind of obscures everything. And then just like what feels like immediately everybody's massacred. Thousands of men gone immediately. And West is like, this is just such a terrible idea. No. And like, so the Northmen are still, of course they survive because they're good fighters and stuff, and they managed to get out of there. So they kind of just, they're like in this little group or whatever, and they're trying to make their way back and stuff after the battle has gone so terribly wrong. And then they still end up, running into different little skirmishes and end up having to fight here and there. So they leave the prince with this lady, and as they go off and go fight these other people, trying to defend this guy and like trying to get them home and do all this stuff, he goes and be a horrible creep of a bastard and goes and try to assault this lady, tries to actually rape her. And then Wes comes back, even though Wes is not a great person, because I didn't mention in the last book, he beat up his sister, like he's a terrible person for that. And like, I mean, granted, all these characters are very gray area, so it's like, it fits. And so he basically takes the prince, Ladislar, and like chucks him off a cliff. I was like, yes, but whoa. I was like, you just made a whole big deal about how this guy has to be protected. Like he's very precious cargo, essentially. He's a prince. He's the crown prince. He's next in line and all this stuff. And he was like, okay, he's done too many things already. He got the army killed. He keeps basically insulting and trying to control like our best help that we have right now and stuff. And he's just like, He's completely worthless, and then he does this while we're trying to fight for him and keep him alive and stuff. He's like, okay, and chucked him off the freaking thing. I was like, wow. So that was basically that. And then they kind of, by the time they get back and actually make it all the way back, they kind of just they lie about it. They're like, well, we got ran down and he didn't make it and stuff, and all this stuff happens. And West is like getting all these accolades, and everybody's like, yeah, that guy was terrible anyway. Like, he was terrible. Like, he shouldn't have been put in that position anyway. Like, he was stupid that he was and all this stuff. So he more or less gets away with it, even though he, of course, feels some type of way about it. So, but our largest chunk of the book was our other group that had Logan Nine Fingers in it, Baez, and like a bunch of other characters. They were on the most traditional kind of there and back again sort of journey. They're going to the edge of the world to find this seed that is essentially calcified magic that Baez wants to use to, what we kind of find out in an offhanded comment, that he wants to use it to fight who is his master's brother, I believe, Canadius. Who is like another, I mean, he's kind of a magi, but I think he's stronger than a magi. And so they kind of go through this entire journey, which is where we get this really interesting level of character development. So Giselle, they call him Luther a lot. So Luther, the prince guy who won the competition in the last one and everything, who's just very arrogant and all this kind of stuff. He was during one of the battles, they were all fighting and stuff, and they were off like everybody's got body counts and all this stuff. And he's over there basically protecting Baez, who was basically injured and recovering because he did a lot of magic and it took a lot out of him and stuff. So he was guarding them, and then a couple people come up to him, come up to Giselle, basically trying to go after them, and he has to protect them. And he kind of learns, oh, all my fighting and stuff wasn't just for, looks and competition or whatever. I can't actually fight. His body already knew what to do, and he instinctually, killed two guys and stuff. But then as he's celebrating, some other guy shows up and smashes him in the face with, like, a axe or, no, with a hammer, I think. Breaks his jaw, messes up his face and stuff. He's lucky that the new comer to the group, Barrow, she knows how to heal, to stitch and stuff. So they stitch him up and they set his jaw and all this stuff. So some time goes by. But of course, after a broken jaw, your face not going to be the same. So he was basically whining about it because his looks are basically slipped. He's not as handsome as he was and stuff. But this is where we get one of those examples of just very clear, direct character development. He has a conversation with Logan, and essentially Logan tells him, like, at least you're still alive, kind of deal with it. Like, it's not terrible. It is what it is. And kind of, just kind of give him this very straightforward, down to earth kind of advice. And he really takes it in. He really takes it in, and he really thinks about it. And he kind of really like, okay, I could be a whiny little brat about this, basically. Or I can just kind of accept it, realize what he's saying. Yes, I am still alive, and I can be grateful for that, and I can just kind of move on. And he actually does. And it's really, really cool to see that. Like, it's kind of similar to how in Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson, basically the character Tress makes a very deliberate, smart decision that characters don't often just make. It's often the thing that a reader or somebody is often like yelling at the screen or yelling at the page, like, just do this thing, just do this thing. But it actually happens. So it's like really refreshing where you can actually point to this event and be like, this is where this person developed into this person. This is where that happens. And it's really cool. That happens a number of times. We don't get a great amount of information about the newcomer Barrow, but we kind of learn just kind of through side stuff about her and through development or with offhanded comments and things. And an interesting relationship develops between her and Logan Nine Fingers, where they have just this butting head kind of thing. She doesn't say a nice thing through the entire book. She's just constantly assaulting him and stuff. Like, and she's just been through all this kind of stuff in her life, and like was sold as a slave and like just all kinds of stuff. And they end up basically forming this sexual relationship that I didn't think was going to happen, because I assumed when she offered him sex, it was kind of a reflex because she was a sex slave in her youth and stuff. So I kind of thought it was this messed up perception of how to show gratitude, because she was very grateful to all his help and how loyal he's been as a fighter behind her and all this kind of stuff, as they've basically been the tanks of their party. So I thought it was something like that. But apparently it wasn't that, and it was a great call that he did take her up on it. And we get probably the best written sex scene in fantasy I can think of, because it was the furthest thing from romantic I could think of, and it was so hilarious. It was just so real and gritty and just kind of gross, and it was just hilarious, because it was very much like Logan, like, it's been a while. And she's like, already, and like and it was just so funny. But then it kind of turns into something a little more sweet, and you kind of get the sense that their emotions for each other are kind of legitimate. But something else that doesn't often happen in fantasy, their own insecurities and their own issues with themselves causes them to make their potential relationship go up in flames, which is really new and kind of unique and something I haven't run into a lot in fantasy. And I think that's really, really cool. So this story has a lot of really cool little elements. I could probably go on talking about little nuanced things all the time, all day, but I'm going to kind of leave it there. I think this one is really, really good. I really like this one. I can't wait to read the last one in the trilogy and see where all this development goes, because I am now totally on board with the development. So much so that I didn't even talk about the additions to the world building, because there's a decent amount of additions to the world building, mostly backstory stuff that Bias talks about. But after the third one, hopefully I get a better total grasp of it. So we'll probably have a full section in that review where I just kind of talk all about the world building stuff that I learned about. So yeah, make sure you stick around for that one. So that's going to do it for this book review, book ramble. So yeah, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and let me know in the comments down below. Did you read Before They Are Hanged? What did you think about it? How do you feel about the character development? What do you think about the kind of low-level world building, or at least the kind of deep world building, if not expansive world building, that Joe Abercrombie's doing with this story? Let me know about that in the comments down below. As always, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will talk to y'all next time. Peace.